Hello, I'm Matthew Munson. Welcome to Thanet Writers Meet Catherine Law, author of 4 titles, including her latest, Map of Stars. Catherine, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So first of all, Catherine, let's talk about the new book, which is out very soon.
It's due out on the 19th of May.
We have a copy of Map of Stars. Now, I will actually ask you first of all, talk us through it. What is Map of Stars about? What's the story behind it? Where do the ideas come from?
Well, I've always been really interested in the Second World War and the First World War, to create stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and I feel a lot of my writing comes from stories that our parents or our grandparents could tell us about those conflicts. Part of me feels it's slipping away from memory now because time moves on. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I thought, what must have it been like to live right here on the front line, being able to see France across the water, knowing the enemy that are waiting there. So I began to want to write a story about the home front in Kent, and the actual spark of the story came to me about 3 years ago. I read a local newspaper story about a country house in Kent where a homing pigeon, a sort of fossilised homing pigeon, fell down the chimney with a wartime message attached to its leg. This happened a few years ago, and that got me thinking, what does that message say? It's been there since the war. And I started to look into how the authorities used homing pigeons to send messages back from France. It sounds slightly dull to talk about homing pigeons, but they did such a massive amount of work during the war. For a start, any bomber missions that went out had pigeons with them on each flight. So if they were shot down, they could send back their coordinates, and these homing pigeons would go home, and they could write messages and send them home. And also, the authorities dropped homing pigeons to the French resistance, so they could also use them. So this just got the story going in my mind about these little pigeons. It's not all about pigeons, also. It's a love story, it's a coming of age story, it's an adventure, but it's also just that spark of that story about that homing pigeon with the message from the war still attached to its leg got me to think about the story. So that's how my narrative starts. I've grown to love Kent. I imagined a lovely old manor house in the countryside near Canterbury, and actually Wickham is the village that I kind of base it around. And so the narrative starts in 1967, so that's a good 20 years after the end of the war, where my heroine and her grown-up daughter, who's about 20, are in the bedroom, and this pigeon just drops down with this message, and I won't give too much away, but the message is basically for my heroine, but is delivered 20 years too late. Oh. So that's that's the basis of the story, and then I take the reader back to the war and what happened during that time. And then you have a conclusion at the end.
Wow, fantastic! Now that's interesting actually, because you talk very passionately about the war.
Yes.
And I'm conscious, obviously, this is book number 4.
Yes.
For you. Now, you've spoken quite evocatively about kind of the wartime and about that historical presence that you feel. Why particularly have you focused in all of your stories so far on those 2 particular areas?
I think because I think those conflicts affected so many ordinary people and changed people's lives, and I feel there are so many stories. Every family has a story. You hear about grandfathers who went off into the war and did heroic deeds. And personally, in my own family, my first book is actually based on what happened to my great auntie. During the war, she met a Czech soldier who was based here, actually near Northampton. She married him. Obviously, there was all sorts of. He was on D-Day. He went to. He fought in the desert and then went to D-Day. So he had a great story. And he's just this ordinary Czechoslovakian man. After the war, she then went with him to Czechoslovakia, and of course then the communists came in and they had to actually escape. So that's that's in my own family. And I'm thinking, my auntie Ginge, was a legend in our family, and she sadly passed away actually soon after the book was. She knew I was going to have the book published, and then she passed away, which is very sad. But that's what got me thinking about all these amazing stories, and I just immersed myself into them.
It's something you said earlier, actually. I want to touch on again. You talk about the spark, what you found is your spark. Now, I'm always interested in knowing what inspires people, where people's ideas come from. Now, actually, you talk about your personal history quite vividly, and actually, have you found that it's always your personal history that inspires you, or can it be something more unusual?
It's so many things, and it's probably one of the hardest questions a writer can be asked, but I accept the challenge. But obviously the first book was the personal history thing for my family, but I can be influenced by my environment, by just a glance out of a train window, and my imagination starts working if I see a house on a hill, or my imagination really runs away with itself sometimes. For my second book, actually, I remember pinpointing the idea for that was when I found a published diary of a woman who had lived in France, a French woman who lived during the Second World War in occupied France and was there to experience D-Day happening. And that, again, it was just, found this diary, I put it away for a number of years and then read it again. I thought that would just be such an amazing story to give the aspect because that story is set in France and in England, because I always feel I have to link back to England because my readers are mainly British people. But yes, and when I was actually finishing that book, the second book, I took myself off down to a cottage in Cornwall, just this lovely isolated cottage, and we'd go for walks in the woods and down to the sea there. And then that environment inspired the third book, just being somewhere just so beautiful and so tranquil, and that was an amazing experience. I'd recommend it to any writer to do that.
Certainly Cornwall is a lovely place to go anyway, so I concur on that one, absolutely. Yeah. Now, perhaps related to that, obviously the stories that you write are very much fixed in time, around specific conflicts. How do you take up that challenge of doing the research to make your books kind of the time?
Well, that is very important to me, getting it right, because I'd hate to insult people's memories by saying the wrong type of plane, or it's very important. But the research I do is I like to go to places to actually experience, as much as I can, the history, and obviously talk to different people. And obviously there's so much information out there on the internet that you can just Google, but I like to actually go. For the first book I went to Prague twice. For the second book I went to Normandy and went around looking at the beaches, and with my mum actually that was fascinating, and that was actually on the anniversary of D-Day that they do every year anyway, and that was amazing. For the third book I went on a tour of the First World War trenches and that area, where the conflict took place in Flanders. When I was on the Western Front tour, we went to a museum there, and that really moved me because I saw artwork that had been drawn in the trenches, just this incredible artwork, and that I actually sort of used the idea of that within that book because it was about an artist who went to the front. So just little things like that, it's unexpected, you never know what you're going to come across and what it may lead to with your writing.
Again, that inspiration again, isn't it, sometimes as well. But I'm interested actually, kind of, to perhaps go from one end to the other, that's kind of elegant about the inspiration and the creativity side, but obviously then comes the routine of actually having to sit down and write the damn thing of whatever it is we're writing.
Yes.
What is your writing routine? Do you have a writing routine?
I do have a writing routine. At the moment, I'm very fortunate that I gave up my full-time job nearly a year ago, and I'd already moved to Margate actually by that time. But so my routine, I do still do freelance work as a journalist, but my writing routine is 7:30 in the morning, the laptop's open, and I start writing. I'm best in the mornings. That's my time. You know, people have sometimes, you know, different times of day are better for different writers. But that's my time, but I always have to know what I'm going to be writing before I start. So I've already thought through the scene. I've thought through what I want to do. I've got notebooks, scribbled notes all over the place, which I'm sure many writers would relate to. So yes, and I might work really well for about 2 hours first thing in the morning, and then I get tired, and I might have to, you know, lots of cups of tea, lots of biscuits. Lots of fresh crusty bread, you know.
I'm with you on that one.
So yeah, that is the routine that I'm privileged enough to be able to do now. But in the past, when I had a full-time job, it would have to be weekends or holidays, and I did sometimes take unpaid leave from my job, just a couple of weeks at a time, I was fortunate to be able to do that, just to crack on with the writing, because it's like. I can't stop myself. I have to do it. So,
I think a lot of people will definitely relate to that. If writing's a
yes.
passion, then absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that leads very nicely on to my last question in that case, because writing is clearly the passion for you. What's next? I mean, you've touched on it a little bit earlier, but
Yes.
what's happening next for you?
Well, book number 5. As I mentioned, I'm moving away from the conflicts and of the 20th century, but I'm starting it. It's set during the 20s and 30s, and again my protagonists are always sort of young women. It's that sort of genre, and this is a coming of age story. It's actually set in Cornwall again, and also in Venice. I'm taking my heroine to Venice. Of course, I have been to Venice, so that's
Excellent.
done the research, and that's exciting. I'm still learning though. At the moment, I'm rejigging whole sections because it wasn't quite flowing well. So even though it's book number 5 and I don't know how many words in, maybe 50,000, I'm still honing it, and I still have to learn from what I've done before. It's a learning curve.
But how far into it are you?
This is about halfway, so it's 50,000 words, and I imagine it'll be 100,000.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Catherine. It's been lovely to talk to you today. It's been very interesting. And Map of Stars does come out this coming Thursday the 19th. So,
yes.
but thank you for your time. It's been lovely to talk
Thank
to
you
you.
very much.
Well, thank you again, Catherine, for coming to talk to us today. I'm Matthew Munson, and on behalf of Thanet Writers, thank you for watching.